The name of Indian historian Professor Dvijendra Narayan Jha made headlines across the country in 2001. But it's unlikely the scholar was happy about such fame. Angry Hindu activists tried to harass him at home and at work, threatened him with violence, and demanded he be imprisoned. After all, the historian had dared to challenge the sacred cow, quite literally. In his new book titled Beef in Indian Dietary Tradition, the researcher argued that the animal has not always held a sacred status in the country, and that the ancestors of modern Indians stopped eating cows later than is commonly believed. The court banned the publication of the controversial work, and the professor had to live on the university campus under protection for some time. In the new episode, we will talk about a phenomenon that still provokes such scandals: dietary prohibitions. You'll find out why many Muslims were afraid of the COVID vaccine. Is it true that no one in Israel eats pork? And finally, how did a cunning bishop turn a beaver into a fish? The most well-known and widespread dietary taboos are religious. By refusing forbidden food, a person demonstrates their faith, distances themselves from secular life, and separates themselves from followers of other religions. Most of these prohibitions are hundreds or even thousands of years old. In Judaism, all food is divided into kosher, which can be eaten, and treif, which is forbidden. For example, animals are considered kosher if they both chew the cud and have split hooves. These are primarily cows, sheep, and goats. According to this interpretation, pork is forbidden because, although pigs have split hooves, they do not chew the cud. You can eat any bird except scavengers and a few specific species listed in the Torah. Among them are the peacock, ostrich, and pelican. Moreover, animals and birds must be slaughtered in a special way. If this rule is broken, even the meat of permitted animals becomes non-kosher. Among sea creatures, only those with scales and fins are considered kosher food. It is also forbidden to eat amphibians, reptiles, and any insects except for locusts. A similar system exists in Islam as well. Everything, according to the Quran and Hadith, the records about the Prophet, Muslims are permitted, and this isn't just about food. What is allowed is called halal, and what is forbidden is called haram. This includes, in particular, alcohol, pork, the meat of donkeys and mules, scavenger birds, predators with fangs, lizards, snakes, and scorpions. In Islam, just like in Judaism, there is a special procedure for slaughtering animals. While the whole world was reading the news about the introduction of the coronavirus vaccine with hope, some Muslims, for example in Indonesia, were concerned. Rumors started spreading that during the production of the vaccine, pork-derived gelatin was being used. Such a thing is haram not only to eat, but even to inject. However, the manufacturers were quick to reassure the faithful. There are no traces of pork in it. Jews and Muslims are not allowed to eat live animals, fresh oysters, or exotic Asian dishes made from live seafood. We've already mentioned cows. In addition, followers of Hinduism and Jainism adhere to vegetarianism, although in Hinduism, it's not a strict prohibition, but rather a recommendation. In Christianity, food taboos are less common, but they do exist. The prohibition on pork. This restriction on meat exists in the Oriental Orthodox churches of Ethiopia and Eritrea, as well as among Adventists. Seventh-day. In the 8th century, Roman popes required the missionary Saint Boniface to forbid newly converted Germanic Christians from eating horse meat. This was considered a remnant of pagan rituals. In addition to permanent prohibitions, religions also have temporary fasts. In Judaism, it is customary to remain hungry on major holidays and days of mourning. In the Islamic calendar, there is the month of Ramadan, during which believers abstain from food and drink during daylight hours. Christians mostly fast for several weeks before major holidays, as well as on Wednesdays and Fridays. On these days, various restrictions are in place, ranging from bans on dairy and meat foods to complete fasting. But are there any explanations for such prohibitions, apart from what is written in the Holy Book? Anthropologists count up to 300 possible reasons, both rational and not so much. Let's take one of the most well-known taboos as an example. Why don't Jews eat pork? By the way, historically, other peoples in the Middle East also refrained from eating it. Phoenicians, Egyptians, Babylonians. It's often explained like this: the pig is considered a dirty animal, not only from a religious perspective, but also in the literal sense, although the author doesn't specifically mention this reason. And in general, there are animals considered clean according to religion, but they're not very tidy and can even eat excrement. These hides. Other scholars explained a prohibition on pork by saying it can contain trichina larvae, but it's unlikely that several thousand years ago people understood parasitology that well. According to another theory, the pig used to be a sacred animal, but later lost its status. However, the ban on its meat remained. There's also a political economic explanation. Raising pigs is profitable, and by doing so, farmers could get rich and become more independent, which was something the local rulers really didn't want. By the way, the Eastern Slavs, who lived alongside Jews for centuries, also tried to find explanations for their dietary preferences. A whole bunch of legends emerged, with pigs, Jews, and Christ as the main characters. For example, Jews supposedly don't eat pork because the pig is their relative, whom Jesus turned into an animal. They say that Muslim countries, as well as Israel and pork, are incompatible. Actually, that's not quite true. For example, in Israel, the import of pork is prohibited, but there is local production. Non-kosher products from farms and meat processing plants. Not only representatives of religious minorities buy it, but also quite a few Jews who do not follow all the rules of the faith. It is also sometimes said that if you raise a pig in conditions where it never touches the ground, for example, on a farm with a wooden floor, then its meat will be kosher. But that's a mess. We'll talk a bit later about how people have circumvented dietary taboos. Not Muslims. In most Muslim countries, you can also get pork if you really want to. It's easier to do this in places with lots of foreigners, for example, in Turkey or the United Arab Emirates. There are prohibitions that seem to have rational explanations, but in reality, they're just based on superstition. Women in the Surendranagar district in northwest India avoid eating papaya, citrus fruits, and peanuts during pregnancy. It's believed that these foods can cause miscarriage or difficult labor. And women from the Shama district in southern Ghana, for roughly the same reasons, they avoided mangoes, sweet potatoes, and instant drinks, like Milo from their company Nestle. Although in reality, there's no evidence that these foods are dangerous for pregnant women. The kinds of food taboos that arise to distribute food in a certain way. Among the indigenous people of Western Malaysia, women and children traditionally eat the meat of small animals, while men eat the meat of large ones. This is explained by the belief that the spirit of small animals. The meat is only small, so it can't harm a weak person. As a result, men freely eat meat, eggs, and fish, while women and children are left with only plants, insects, and rodents. It's not hard to guess who came up with these rules, is it? Men themselves. Similar restrictions exist in Western Nigeria as well. Parents don't give children meat or eggs. There's a belief that such foods will somehow teach children to steal. When a duck is cut up, the stomach and thighs are eaten by the elder members of the tribe, while the little ones are left only with the lower parts of the legs, and sometimes the head. Besides that, little kids aren't given coconut milk because it supposedly makes them stupid, and liver because it supposedly causes pus to form in the lungs. As they say, only the best for the children. Some prohibitions among Native Americans help them preserve their food resources. The Metsulik, indigenous people of northern Canada, alternate eating the meat of different marine animals. On the same day, you can't eat both one and the other. The Jewish prohibition against mixing milk and meat has the same roots, to avoid using up valuable food all at once. Modern social movements like locavorism fall under similar prohibitions. Its supporters suggest giving up, or at least reducing, the consumption of imported foods in favor of local ones. This would help support local economies, and since food wouldn't have to be transported from far away, it would be possible to do without chemical preservatives. Many vegetarians also give up meat to reduce the harm that meat production causes to the environment. Methane emissions from animals, wastewater pollution, and the occupation of large areas by pastures. Many modern vegetarians also restrict their diet for ethical reasons. They give up meat and fish so as not to kill animals. And they avoid dairy products, eggs, and honey so as not to cause animals suffering or exploit them. Showing empathy has become one of the popular reasons for modern dietary taboos in Western culture. Dogs and cats in the West are seen as pets and companions, so eating them is considered barbaric and can only be justified in extreme situations, such as starvation. At the same time, the meat of cats and dogs is part of the traditional cuisine of many peoples in Africa, Asia, and South America. In some places, special meat breeds of dogs were even developed. The situation is changing with the growing popularity of Western culture and Islam, where the dog is also considered an unclean animal. Because of this, people are starting to abandon and even condemn the traditional culinary practices. For now, the last bastions of freely eating dog meat remain China, Vietnam, and South Korea. In some countries, for example, the United Kingdom, it is not customary to eat horse meat. After all, the horse is considered another friend of humans. In some American states, the slaughter of horses and the sale of their meat is even prohibited by law. At the same time, in France or Italy, horse meat is a completely ordinary product. A similar situation exists with insects and rodents. Most human communities eat these animals, although in the West this is considered barbaric. However, unlike with cats, dogs, and horses, here it's not about empathy, but rather about disgust. At the same time, there are hundreds of species of insects and arachnids that are suitable for human consumption. They are nutritious, rich in proteins and vitamins, and raising the same grasshoppers is much easier, cheaper, and more environmentally friendly than raising cows. That's why the spread of insect-based food can help fight hunger in some countries. By the way, in fact, every person eats quite a few insects and their fragments over a lifetime, which accidentally end up in food. Moreover, insects are used in the preparation of some modern products. In the confectionery industry, carmine, a red dye made from crushed cochineal insects, and shellac, which is a secretion of these insects, are used. Attitudes toward certain foods among different peoples change over time. Just a few centuries ago, in many European countries, seafood like oysters and lobsters was considered food, but only for the poor living in coastal areas. Now, these are delicacies. Knowing about religious dietary restrictions, people often try to get around them without directly breaking the rules. Buddhism, which arrived in Japan in the 6th century, brought with it a taboo on eating meat. The Japanese simply renamed deer and bears as mountain whales and kept eating them. After all, the local variation of Buddhism allowed fish, and at that time, many marine mammals, whales, dolphins, porpoises, were also classified as fish. The fish loophole was also used by a Quebec bishop in the 17th century. He allowed his congregation to eat beaver meat during Lent because it lives in the water and has a scaly tail. Therefore, it's a fish. Around the same time, the monks of the Norman Abbey of Lautreport expanded the list of fish species and included the puffin among them, since it mostly lives near water. Therefore, it could be eaten during Lent.